Coming to your galaxy November 3rd, 2023. Star Wars, A KOTOR Story, Bastila, Part 2, Identity.
Hello, Old Republic podcast listeners out there. You have probably been wondering what is going on with the Bastila Audiodrama. Right, June 23rd of 2023, so not too long ago, we released Part 1, Bastila Strike. That came out. That was awesome. It was very epic. We loved putting it out there for everyone. And Part 2 has been in progress pretty much ever since even before that released, and it is getting awfully close to the finish line. We are gearing up, getting ready to release that one into the world, and I couldn't be more excited with the way things are going about it. So what we thought we would do today is I'm going to sit down with the creator of the Bastila Audiodrama, none other than Cassia herself. You might know her from this podcast that you're listening to right now, but she's also the writer and creative mind behind the Bastila Audiodrama. Cassia, how are you doing today? Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. It's going to be fun to be in the hot seat again. But yeah, I'm doing great, and it's always fun to talk about the audio drama. I love it so much.
That's right. It is always fun to talk about the audio drama and to work on the audio drama, and that's what we're going to be doing today. I've got a couple of questions here, just some behind-the-scenes sort of things. We did a behind-the-scenes episode for Part 1, and we actually brought on some of the voice actors, composers for Part 1 to talk about that a little bit. Most of those people are reprising their roles in some fashion or another here in Part 2, so when we get to Part 3, we'll probably have some more guests on with us, but today it is just you and I talking about Part 2. So my first question to you, Cassia, Part 1 was Bastila Strike. What's Part 2 called, and can you give us a little synopsis of what we can expect in Part 2?
Yeah, so Bastila, the audio drama, it's set up in a triptych. The first section was Strike, and that was where the Jedi Strike team, went over to Revan's flagship, which we called the Behemoth, and you got to see the result of that encounter, and Malik was involved. And then the sequel to that is called Identity, and it follows Bastila bringing Darth Revan in a coma back to Dantooine, and you get to see the Dantooine Jedi Council, how they would handle that situation, and what happens to Revan, what happens to Bastila, and kind of what it sets up.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's quite a departure, I think, Part 2. You know, Part 1, if you've had a chance to listen to the audio drama, please go do that. We released it on the YouTube and the podcast feed back on June 23rd, and that is more action oriented. This one is really getting into kind of the crux of the situation we find ourselves in at the beginning of Knights of the Old Republic. Now we have put a trailer together out onto our YouTube page, so you can go take a look at that, but I'm also going to play it right here. It's just about 60 seconds long, so let's listen to that real quick, Cassia.
He is alive.
You disobeyed us. Why?
Jedi do not believe in killing their prisoners. It's not the Jedi way.
Perhaps we could give him a second chance. On our terms.
We could mold him into a loyal soldier. Wipe his memories. We could find out his secrets.
What will happen if his old identity returns?
We will end him permanently.
Okay, so that is the trailer we got put together there for part 2. Now, Cassia, as I'd mentioned before that we have part 1. It's kind of this big action set piece, right? There's a space battle going on, there's lightsabers, there's explosions, there's a Wilhelm scream in there. Part 2 here is definitely more of this roundtable conversation kind of a thing. You're the writer here. How is writing part 1 different than part 2? Because thematically, they're very different.
Oh, for part 1, I really struggled, I think, the most with part 1. Just kind of like, it's called Star Wars. You think it would be kind of like obvious, but like space battles, they're kind of hard to like make interesting, and you kind of have to be like, in your mind, like I had to like draw pictures, sketch it out, like, okay, where is the Republic here? How do we make this compelling visually and story-wise? And where are the Sith? How is Malik perceiving this? How is Revan perceiving this? And it's like, how do we make it urgent but like not instantaneous? So I think that was the hardest part, honestly, is just that space battle. But once I kind of got Bastila onto the behemoth, it came about a bit easier. And I think what is interesting about kind of writing part 1 and going into part 2 and 3 is I kind of find like Bastila doesn't really talk about her feelings. In a lot of ways, she's kind of just the mouthpiece of the Jedi Council and their dogma. And it's kind of just like throughout the audio drama, you get to see like the triangulation of like what Malik, Bastila, and Revan, and what the wiped identity of Revan, like we call him Vinar, like they're kind of the 3 main characters, I would say, but the Jedi Council runs a lot of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. You do a good job of kind of capturing that essence of Bastila. We always joke, and it's kind of the big KOTOR joke that Karth doesn't ever want to talk about it, even though you keep asking him. But, Bastila is this other character who doesn't have anyone to ask these things, right? She's kind of a mouthpiece for the Jedi. She's a Padawan, so she doesn't, can't really talk to the Council about things, of course. And then by the time you get to the events of the game of Knights of the Old Republic, she's kind of in charge of everyone, right? So she doesn't really have anyone she can really confide in. That kind of gets addressed a little bit into part 3, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves too much because we are diving into part 2 today. So getting back to the creation of this thing a little bit, Cassia here. So were there new challenges for part 2 that we didn't have in part 1, in the in the writing process or the creation, the voice actors, the music, sound design, anything like that? And to that end, was it easier to put together part 2 than part 1, or vice versa? Did we learn anything from putting together part 1 that helped us with part 2? And to kind of piggyback off that question, our patron, Lorg, asked what the most challenging part of putting the audio drama together has been for us. So to kind of distill that down, what were our new challenges here for part 2, and how is it different than part 1?
Well, yeah, part 2, it's kind of more of a conversation or discussion, which kind of is the pro and the con in the writing process, because writing, it's really fun to write conversations, but I would say the challenge is, how do you make this appropriate, like, for all the characters, like, story-wise, and, like, have it happen naturally, but it kind of escalates, so there's drama. And, like, how do I just, like, not make every character sound the same? So there's, like, some different voices within the Jedi Council. Like, Vandar's probably the most open-minded Jedi there. In my audio drama, in my canon of KOTOR, I put Atris there because she's a great character, and I kind of wanted more of a female presence on the Jedi Council there. And I was like, it makes sense in my head. Maybe she's like an adjunct traveling faculty member from Coruscant just visiting Dantooine, because I'm like, it kind of makes sense because Dantooine's Jedi Council, like, I think we kind of said round table earlier, like, we kind of visualize the Jedi Council to be, like, perfect and kind of like Camelot, but if you kind of really look into the story of KOTOR 1 and 2, it's like, basically it was the Jedi Council's fault, you know, could be the subtitle, so, yeah.
Yeah, no, to that end, I agree. I think it makes sense that it should be there, because I guess if you're mounting an attack on, you know, the Dark Lords of the Sith, you might have, you know, all of your people there at kind of mission control to see how this is going to play out. So I think it makes sense. And you brought up a good point. You're writing for a lot of different characters here in Part 2, Cassius. So we're hearing basically from the bulk of the Jedi Council and Bastila here in this episode. Obviously, the audio drama is entitled Bastila, therefore we can deduce that you have some sort of personal connection to the character of Bastila. So who was your favorite to write for in this part? Was it Bastila, or was it one of the council members?
Vrook and Atris are just kind of fun to write because I think they are good. And I think if you, I think if you talk to Atris, you would think she's open-minded and doing everything right. But, like, she's probably someone who, like, if someone was talking to them and it's like, I didn't feel like it was the Jedi way to do that, you know? Like, Atris would say, but we told you the Jedi way. Like, it's okay to think for yourself because we told you what to think, you know? Like, and would probably say it, like, without, like, realizing, like, what she was actually saying, you know, like, and thinking she was giving good advice, you know. Bastila is interesting, but the more I wrote the audio drama, I was like, so much of her character happens beneath the surface, like, where Karth just kind of tells you he doesn't want to talk about it, like, I think Bastila does think she's talking about it, but she's not really saying what she wants to say. So it's just kind of an interesting, like, writer's challenge, you know? So, like, I think Bastila kind of, some aspects remind me of myself and, like, people, like, you see in the world or, like, you've grown up with, you know? And like I said, Vrook and Atris are fun, and you try not to make everyone on the Jedi Council, like, kind of, like, mustache twirly, you know? I think it's, like, good to kind of imply, like, people can be good, like, in positions of power, but sometimes they just go along with things, and, like, sometimes they just make mistakes, kind of like maybe, you know, like Dorak or Zar, you know.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. And then on the opposite side of that, so obviously you're writing the story here, but you're also you know, the producer, the director, the head honcho of this project. So on a technical side, then getting this put together, was there any big kind of takeaways or differences, or the way you approach Part 2 different than the way we approached Part 1? You know, be it with the music or the sound design or the voice actors or anything like that, or was that pretty much the same as how we ran things in the first part?
So, kind of behind the scenes, I wrote everything and kind of had some, like, script people look it over, and I was like, this is kind of long. It's about 30-ish pages altogether. So I was like, if I'm gonna make it into a project, I probably need to break it up just so, like, someone's not doing, like, 30 to 40 minutes of sound, you know? Otherwise, it's probably never gonna get done. And, like, getting people to like do like 30 pages of, you know, like voice acting is big ask. So I was like, I always kind of like trilogies, you know? So I was like, I think this kind of breaks itself into 3 sections. So maybe we do part 1 at one time, get that out of the way, and then kind of just work on 2 and 3, you know, and then 2 and 3 come out when they do. So that was kind of what I wanted to do. And going into part 2, I definitely was like, you know what, like, our friend Marcus Mosley is an incredible voice actor. Like, maybe he can help me, like, on the voice actor sessions. And sometimes you sat on those too, like, just so we're getting, like, the strongest performance, because, like, maybe I'm a little bit like George Lucas and it's, like, faster, more intense, you know? Or it's like, it's good, faster, more intense, you know? Like, Marcus can give better direction, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Marcus was very helpful there in that instance of getting kind of the best out of the voice actors, because I, despite having the starring role, not really, of the first part, I am no good at voice acting at all. So therefore, when we're working with people who are actually really good at that, I'm kind of just sitting in awe, and I have no direction to give because everything I thought sounds awesome, and that's kind of where I would have left it. But Marcus definitely was helpful in getting kind of the best out of those actors there. So okay, good stuff there. We've got a couple of questions here that people sent in wanting to know about the audio drama here, part 2. So Arbor asks, maybe just hearing a little bit about the process. We've kind of talked about that a little bit, but where did it start and who was involved? And I thought maybe I'd tackle this one real quick as far as who was involved. So this was directed, the screenplay, by you, Cassia. We had Salathiel Jones was a script editor here, helped us out quite a bit. I came on to help do the sound design and some of the production, same as I did in part 1. Our music was by Joseph David Spence, who spoke a little bit about the music in our first behind the scenes episode. And then we have Havila Moore, Marcus Mosley, Jake Bodie, and Alana Kaplan lending their voice talents here for this second part. But as far as part 2 goes, specifically, Cassia, where did it start? So you wrote kind of this whole story, right, and then broke it up into 3. At what point did you feel comfortable kind of letting, I don't know, part 1 out into the world, or did you feel like it was in competent hands between everyone that was kind of working on it enough to kind of turn your attention to part 2, or were they overlapping at all, or did you wait until that first one came out, or how did that work?
Yeah, so writing it, it was all written, and then once I felt like I'd had people look at the script, like it made sense, and we kind of dotted the I's and crossed the T's on the script just so it looked, like professional-ish, like for the video. Like any flaws that are still there are mine, but we kind of worked on it, and we got the voice acting. It was kind of like mostly part 1 voice acting. When we got that in the can, then we did 2 and then 3, and then music, I think, is like it's demanding, like, to ask composers, like to be like, can you make this sound like like John Williams, and like we have a budget, like, which isn't like the biggest budget, but it's like so like we did pay the composers for their time, but like I just wish we were able to pay them much more, because we have such talented friends, and they're so busy, but it's kind of just the voice acting, the sound design, or I guess sometimes it was the sound design first, and then the voice acting, and then kind of leveling it, and then leveling it with the music when that's completed. That's kind of the process. And you're much more familiar with the sound design, because this audio drama would not exist without you, because I still to this day do not know how to sync an Audacity file, like with two of them. I'm like, how do you do it? I can't do it. So, yeah.
That's right. There's a lot of audio files that go into these things, for sure. And maybe we'll take a little peek at the technical side here in just a second. But, we've talked about the actors here a little bit, and C. Payne sent in a question kind of asking about that. We talked a little bit kind of about directing them and their performance, and basically how Marcus did that for us, because neither you or I really were kind of, I don't want to say comfortable, but, we weren't as scrutinizing as Marcus would have been, maybe.
Yeah.
So definitely appreciate that. But where did we find the voice actors? Cassia, where did you find the people that voiced all of these different characters?
Yeah, so back in the day when we were discussing Manon and Jolie, I believe you brought to attention Holochronicles, which Marcus had created the first season of, and you're like, this is an incredible, kind of like podcast series, about Jolie's earlier days. And I listened to it. I'm like, oh, this is really good. And we had him on the podcast. And back in the day, the Unreal Cinema KOTOR adaptation was happening, and there was some casting happening for that. And I said, hey, Marcus, you should totally audition. You're really good. And he ended up being casted as Trask Olgo. And kind of through Marcus, we were able to be connected with a lot of talented voice actors. And when I was writing this project, we had some auditions, and if we weren't able to find someone, Marcus could be like, oh, have you heard Joseph? Or, oh, have you heard Havila? So it's kind of like just networking that way, just kind of like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So that's how we got kind of hooked up with the different actors that are working on this project for us. And then Christopher wants to know just kind of general information about some editing and technical stuff. So basically, we had all of these voice actors. We'd go on and we would do kind of these voice acting sort of like script read kind of things, get that stuff saved, and then it was down to kind of putting this thing together, right? So it's basically mixing up all of the narrator and the different vocal pieces that we had from the voice actor. You and I would do something that we called endearingly KOTOR Idol, where we would sit down and listen to kind of all of the voice actors and pick which takes we wanted and which ones we thought sounded the best or worked the best in the context of what kind of story we were telling. And then from there, it's kind of just balancing out those levels, because everyone's recording on a different microphone, of course, at their house or in their home studio. Some of them had, and really just kind of getting the quality to match up as much as possible, and then layering in the sound effects, which is where I came in kind of on this side, right, and putting that together and doing the sound effects. And I'm pulling just a bunch of different assets off of the internet and YouTube, things like that, and trying to just kind of create some sort of soundscape, which has been really interesting for me, because you want it to sound awesome, right? Oh man, yeah. I want to put in all these cool sound effects, but you want it to also not take away from what the story is, what the voice actors are doing, what the narrator is doing. So really it's more of supplementing the story, right? Giving it a little bit more of I don't know, audible appeal in a way, right? Because we don't have any sort of visual medium, sort of, and I'm going to get to that here in just a second, but it's kind of layering those all together. And I think over the course of part 2, I want to say that I used 38 it was 38 or 39 different sound effects to kind of create this. And part 2 is much different. We talked about it a little bit. Part 1 is this big kind of space battle and lightsabers and all that sort of thing. This is more of a discussion, so it was a lot more of ambient type sounds and things to just give it a little bit more feeling of atmosphere. You feel like you're there listening in to this conversation that's happening on Dantooine. And that's kind of my part in that before we turn it over to the music department to start working on the audio, the music tracks for that. But then there's another piece of this that you also need, Cassia. If you're going to put this onto YouTube, you need some sort of, I don't know, like artwork or thumbnail, or I mean, that could be anything. But, you know, we were putting a lot of effort into getting this thing put out, and we wanted to get something that was really cool and really kind of descriptive of what we were going to have. So we, you know, commissioned some artwork to make our thumbnail and the little video. So did you want to talk a little bit about the thumbnail art? You know, who did it and kind of why we chose the direction we went with for it?
Yeah, so a lot of our cast is multi-talented. We have some voice actors who are also, like Joseph, David Spence, are also composing parts 2 and 3, you know, and Jake Bodie, he's also an incredible artist, and I was like, you know what, we need, like, someone to kind of make a very specific, for part 1, like, strike. Like, we can't just get something off the internet. We just need it to, like, look and feel like KOTOR, but kind of have, like, a binary star, you know, forming in the background. It's, like, Republic versus Sith forces, so we can't just take a screenshot for our thumbnail for, part 1 strike, so we ended up having Jake create a thumbnail, and I thought it was going to take a while, but like it was like one day. And then for part 2, it's not as much of a space battle, it's more of a conversation with the Jedi Council and kind of the fate of Darth Revan, who's in a coma, is kind of in the balance, and it's kind of centering on Bastila, and we are not artists, you know, but we kind of sketched out our versions, and and then we handed like kind of like our artistic depictions, and I think yours actually had Atris with a pumpkin spice latte.
It did, yeah.
Yeah, so he took those and made us a good thumbnail, and yeah, it's great, and looking forward to part 3. We're like, it's kind of like part 3 will be kind of like more of the story of KOTOR as we're familiar with, kind of summarized in a different way. So maybe looking forward to the future, it'll probably involve the triangulation of Bastila, Vanar, and Darth Malak.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, the pumpkin spice latte did not make it into the final version. I'm sad to say, as we are getting into pumpkin spice latte time here in the real world. So that's okay. That's okay. I'm no artist. My little stick figures with a little cup of pumpkin spice latte was as good as I could do. And yeah, Jake Bodie is incredible. Like, it took us longer to draw like our little ideas than it did for him to create the beautiful thumbnail that we ended up getting. So definitely great there. C-Pain also wanted to know if there were any sort of copyright issues when writing about Star Wars stuff. And I will say that Star Wars Lucasfilm has always been really, really good and really supportive of kind of the artist community and spreading the gospel of Star Wars, and, you know, have done things in the past like promote and have, you know, kind of film festivals where they just showcase different fan things. That being said, you can't really make any money off of these projects, so they're strictly from a passion project kind of a thing, just to, you know, spread the love of Star Wars in that sense. So that's kind of where that comes in. And yeah, I think that, you know, kind of summarizes basically the, you know, kind of the gist of what we had going for us here and putting this together. It's a really great kind of second act. I think it's going to play really nicely coming off that big battle. Everyone's going to get a chance to kind of catch their breath and see how those conversations might have happened between Bastila and the Jedi Council, you know, when she turns back up with Darth Revan in her possession, I guess. So Cassia, is there anything else that we need to know about part 2? Our listeners out there, is there anything else that you want to clue them in on or talk about, or anything else as it references part 2 here, Bastila Identity?
Most of it takes place on Dantooine, and where I could give you suggestions, like when we're creating the soundscape, I'm like, let's have some rain here, you know? I just love Dantooine. I think it's my favorite KOTOR planet, and there's little details, I think, that connect to the game. So hopefully people like that, and part 1 and 2 are connected, but I would say 2 and 3, where 2 ends, 3 literally begins, and I hope it's fun for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people will really enjoy it, and it'll be a nice kind of next piece of the Bastila Audiodrama. So looking forward for everyone to get a chance to listen to it. If you're listening to this, it's probably just on the horizon here to get part 2 put out. As of recording, I think we're just waiting on just a touch of music, and it should not be too long at all before we get that finished up and released into the world. So definitely looking forward to getting everyone's feedback on it, getting it out there for people to listen to and to enjoy. And of course, as soon as we have it finished, we will have it up on Patreon first. That's where we put kind of all of our rough cuts and ideas. And I think you might have even put or at least my terrible little stick figure drawing on our Patreon. Is patreon.com/oldrepublicpodcast. You can go. It's a great way to support the podcast and get some behind the scenes kind of info there. So, Cassie, I think that wraps it up on your end. Was there anything that you wanted to ask me, or just anything else? Or are we ready to sign off and get back to work?
I just want people to know that while I might have written and directed this, there's a whole team, working with me, and they're in the credits, and you've done so much, the soundscape and sound design. I wouldn't have been able to do it on my own, so I just wanted you to know that I'm very thankful, and you worked really hard, and it sounds great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor to work on this project and learn a few new tricks here from my own audio editing expertise, and hopefully everyone out there enjoys it. So that's going to wrap it up here for our Bastila Part 2 behind the scenes episode. If you have any other questions or comments about the audio drama, check out that first part. It's on our YouTube page. Like I said, it released back in June of this year. I think there's a playlist for audio drama on there too. You can find out all the bits and bobs that we have put up there about that there. Check us out, on Discord if you want to talk to us more about it there. And I think that's going to wrap it up. So thanks for joining us. Thank you for coming on to the podcast, Cassia, and answering these hot seat questions. I do appreciate that. And may the force be with you.
May the force be with you.